Hey everyone, welcome to Motion UX. I'm Ivan Witteborg, and today we're going to be talking about Lottie. What is it, why it matters, and a little bit on how to use it. So let's dive in. All right, let's start with the origin of Lottie. So this was created as a side project by Salih while he was at Airbnb. And essentially, Lottie is a JavaScript framework that renders After Effects animations natively on the web in on your device, iOS or Android. Um, so let me actually show you what that looks like. So you see these on this web page right now. These are actually like Lottie animations. And so if I go to the inspect tool, we can actually see, if we can catch it in time, we can see that these are actually shapes. Let's get it. All right. You can see that this is actually like an SVG shape, and it's all this like weird code here, right? Because that's what the basically the JSON file that you export from After Effects is all of these like SVG paths and animation instructions and all of these different things. And Lottie essentially translates that and renders these native animations on the web. So you might be asking like, okay, well, why would we use this over like a GIF or a video or creating it just like just a developer creating the animations on their own? Well, the reason that Lottie is amazing is because it significantly reduces the level of effort. For a developer to create something like this, like just directly in code, would be near impossible, probably. And if you could do it, it would take you an extremely long amount of time that is just not worth the time investment. And so you could export a GIF and play it here, right? But GIFs with transparent backgrounds don't look really great. And even if there is no transparent background, the file size is super large, or the file size is small, but the quality is terrible. With Lottie, we get an animation that plays super smooth at your device's like frame rate or refresh rate. And it's a very, very small size. It's also scalable, and it doesn't lose any resolution or quality because they're basically vectors. And with that, you just get amazing quality at a small file size. And me as an animator or designer, I create the thing in After Effects, export the file, hand it to my developer, and they basically like plug and play, and you can have things playing like this. And so the entire workflow is significantly simplified, and you're just able to get to production much, much, much faster. So let's move on to how we might use a Lottie file or a Lottie animation. So I'm here in After Effects, and I have this super simple looping square morph animation here. And by default, After Effects can't create Lottie files for a developer to use. So in order to get that to happen, we actually need the help of one of two extensions or plugins. One of which is called BodyMovin, and this was the original plugin that allowed us to export animations from After Effects into a JSON file that then Lottie can render on the web or a device. We also have another extension that's newer from LottieFiles, which is independent. It's not really related to Airbnb or Lottie itself, but it's a third-party site that was created to host Lottie animations and things like that. And they created their own renderer that uses a lot of what BodyMovin has, but has a little bit of a few extra kind of features and things in it. But say we want this amazing little morphing animation that we have. We think it's really going to change our experience for the better. And we just need to get it out of After Effects and into a Lottie file. So we have BodyMovin open. What we first want to do is we want to make sure that our specific composition in After Effects is selected. We can go to the settings, and there's a ton of stuff in here. And really, all of this stuff, most of the time we leave it default unless there is an issue with it rendering on your phone or rendering on the web. Then we kind of come in here, we just go through them to see what we need to modify. Glyphs, typically if you don't want to have any issues with your fonts, you can convert your fonts to shapes, and it will kind of embed that font file into the Lottie file so that you're able to use it without any issues. You can also externally link a font to it as well. It kind of does it automatically. You kind of have to direct it to a specific font file as well. This is if you need hidden layers to be exported as well. So if you're in here in After Effects and you have some extra layers that are hidden that you can't actually see, but for some reason your animation relies on them, like maybe a mask or something like that, you would want that to be selected. Guides, same kind of thing. You can have layers in After Effects that are guides. And if you need those to be exported for any reason, then you can have that selected. Extra comps is if you have multiple compositions in After Effects that your one animation that you're trying to export relies on, then you can reference those specific extra comps. For this one, it's super simple, so we don't need it. Then we can actually look here at the assets. So these are like images, any like PNGs, JPEGs, those sorts of things. You can, if you need the specific original asset names to be exported in the Lottie file as it is, then you want to select that. You can select those names to be used as IDs. And so what this is important for is if your developer needs to reference a specific image, maybe this is going to be a dynamic image that swaps out every time you use it, or you want it to be a really scalable Lottie animation that you can use in multiple places in a specific experience or platform. You would want things to be named logically, and you would want to have kind of like an asset list that you're sharing with your developers so they know what to reference as they're using. Copy original assets. What that will do is we'll actually like make a copy of your image file and put that in the same folder as your JSON Lottie file so that you can externally link to an image or something like that. Alternatively, you can include it in your JSON, and so it'll essentially like take the image data and copy and paste all of the code that makes up that image and paste it into the JSON file, so you have no external file that you're referencing. Typically in production environments, you wouldn't do that because it's not as scalable. You would always want to reference an external image, unless it was something that was evergreen and it wasn't going to change, but the likelihood of that being the case most times is very rare. You could also skip images, like maybe you're updating this Lottie file and it's something that you've had, it's a file that you've used many, many times for different experiences and you need to change a specific aspect of the animation. Your developers only need the JSON file. They don't need any of the other images. You can just skip the image export. You can also include video and audio assets if your animation has that. That is not something that's typically supported in the actual Lottie JavaScript framework, so that is not something that you would typically put in a Lottie file. So that's assets, and then we have export mode, so we can do standard or we can split the file. The reason that splitting the file might be helpful, say that you have like different states of an interaction. You have like the hover state, the click state, all of those sorts of things. Sometimes it's easier for a developer to say like, hey, reference this JSON Lottie file for the hover, reference this one for the click state, reference this one for the active state. You can also keep everything together, and you can actually put, let me show you, you can actually put markers and name these. We can say this loop in. We can actually put markers, and these markers will be exported with the Lottie JSON file, and your developer can reference that when they are triggering different aspects of the animation. So you can say like, hey, maybe this is where it starts, and this is where the loops, and this is where the loop actually starts, and then it loops out over here, so on and so forth. And so this could be like hover state, active state, and you could say go to this frame or go to this specific label and play from there. All right. Demo is sometimes helpful for just debugging it, especially if you're going to be putting this Lottie file on a web platform rather than like a mobile device, like a native device. So this will actually export your Lottie file as its own JSON file and then an HTML preview, so you can actually click on it and it opens a local website that you can actually see the Lottie file playing. And sometimes it's helpful to debug just to see it working and how does it perform and all those sorts of things. This will write up a report of it, I guess, if things go wrong, how many layers are exported, all those sorts of things. Rive, I'm not familiar with Rive, but this would be if you're using that specific type of project, you would export it that way. This standalone, you would typically not use in production environments because you would want to externally reference the Lottie framework from a CDN or host that locally. But this will actually bundle that Lottie JavaScript framework in a single file with your animation. I really don't have any idea what Banner is, and I've never had to use it, so we're going to skip over that one. AVD is if you need something specific for Android, but I also have never had to use that in iOS, Android, or web environments. And then SMIL is an SGV file that uses a different thing for animations. It's an experimental feature, so I also don't typically use that. You also have expression options. So one thing to note is that Lottie animations cannot do everything that you can do in After Effects. And so in After Effects, there's a ton of different effects that you can do when you're creating animation. When you export something, so you're using a ton of masks and some effects that are built into After Effects. If you export that to a Lottie file, you'll see that some things are just broken. And BodyMovin and the Lottie JavaScript framework are always being updated. And so it's helpful to check back there to see like, okay, what features now are compatible with After Effects? There's a whole list of things that they have that do work and a list of things that they have that don't work. And so this, if you're using expressions, sometimes expressions work and sometimes they do not. But this can basically bake your expressions into keyframes, so it's easier for you. It's more foolproof that the animation will continue to work. Extend the conversion beyond the work area. So your work area is where you've marked off in After Effects. Here we can see that right here. This is your work area right here. And so say that I wanted to render all of the expressions and things that extend beyond the work area. So there may be things out here that I still want to convert in my expressions. Or you can remove all expression properties. And that's good if you have maybe used them for testing in some way, and now you've kind of like hand animated everything. You can remove those and it'll reduce the file size. So next we have advanced export settings. So there's some old JSON formats that you could export if you're using older players and you need backwards compatibility. That I typically don't use. Trim unused keyframes and layers. It basically just removes all the extra stuff beyond the work area and just cleans up your file, makes it a little bit smaller. Skips default properties, and so it will just like skip things that are just default in your animation so that there's no unnecessary data in there, and it just makes it more slim. So really all these advanced export settings are just like refining further that file that you are going to be exporting. Typically, there's not a need to select any of these types of things, but you can if you're maybe running into issues or you have a specific use case. Non-supported properties, and so this might be necessary if you're exporting something that is not really supported, but you want to still export it for some reason, maybe to reference afterwards. And then pretty print JSON is just so the JSON format is a little bit readable. So if you actually go open this JSON file when you export it, here we'll open it up right here. You can see it's one line and it just goes on forever. This is a Lottie file in JSON. So if you hit pretty print, it will space out, make everything a little bit easier for you to see, but the file size is a lot larger. So it might be good for you to like debug, but this is not what you would put into a production environment. Metadata, we can add some file names and After Effects file names into the actual file. And we can also add custom properties. And then we can do audio and those sorts of things. For this, we don't need any audio, so we will not do anything with that. All right, let's move over to LottieFiles. So LottieFiles, it is based off of a lot of the things from BodyMovin, so it has a lot of those things baked into it, and then it has a few extra features. And this was created by the folks over at the LottieFiles site. All right, so one thing that you'll notice if I hit this button here, that it will actually show me what the rendering, what the Lottie file rendering will be and what it will look like and all of those sorts of things. And right here, I'm able to immediately upload it to LottieFiles, which is their own platform that has a whole collection of a bunch of different types of animations exported as LottieFiles. And then we also have, we can save it immediately as a JSON or a .lottie. .lottie is a format that LottieFiles has created to kind of give LottieFiles its own identity. I haven't really seen it catch on in a wide scale, so we typically still use just the JSON format, but .lottie has some benefits to it. It looks a little bit different as far as like the file extension, and there's a little bit more compression. It's essentially like a compressed zipped format that everything that you need for that animation is in there. So like your images would be in there, some metadata would be in there, some references of like what are your IDs and those sorts of things. and the actual Lottie file are all baked into this one file, and it's compressed. So you can get a little bit better file size when you use .lottie. And then in here, you can see like, are there any crazy things happening in my rendering that is causing it to like crash or take up a lot of resources? And I can kind of like isolate what parts of the animations are doing that. It's a really nice visualization. And then I can also change the background if I wanted to. If I wanted to like an actually white background, I could hit white, or if I just wanted a transparent background, I can do transparent, which typically it will be, unless your animation has been created with a specific background, typically like in micro interactions and micro animations, like typically you want transparent backgrounds. And if you upload the file to LottieFiles, you can then scan a QR code that will appear here with your phone and preview it natively on your device. Why that's helpful is because it actually uses the native iOS or Android, depending on what device you have. It uses that renderer. And so some things that work for the web don't work for iOS and don't work for Android, or you have to tweak things specifically. And so it's always good to be able to debug and troubleshoot your different issues that way. You also, this will fill up with different previews of every file that you've like uploaded and rendered out previously. So it's kind of a nice little history there. And then it also gives you a search directly into the LottieFiles like database. All right, so now that we've gotten a pretty good overview of both of these plugins and how to create LottieFiles, let's actually create a LottieFile from this animation. So using the LottieFiles plugin, I'm going to create a Lottie JSON file. I click it, and it will ask me where I want to save it. I've already saved it once here, so I will just overwrite it. And you can see, boom, I got my little Lottie animation JSON. I can send that to a developer. They'll plug and play, and we're done. Let's go over to BodyMovin. So if I save all of my settings, we can select the destination folder. I want it in the same spot. I can name it. We can say BodyMovin Lottie animation. And we're going to go ahead and select it. And I can also select multiple compositions at the same time. And this is sometimes helpful if you're working on a larger scale project, say like a bunch of icon animations. You can select all of these at one time. I'm not sure if you're able to do that with the LottieFiles plugin. So I'll go ahead and hit render. If I tap this, it'll open up my folder, and you'll see this one has something a little bit extra. It has this demo folder because I actually selected for it to create a HTML preview. So if I actually go ahead and open it up, we'll be able to see, hey, this is my actual Lottie file, but being rendered in the web natively. And so you can see as I'm inspecting it, it's a little bit laggy, but you can see like, oh, this one path is being animated as a native SGV in the web. And so I could set this up to be like a button or a hover interaction or anything that I really want. And what's great about this little demo is that you can actually see how this Lottie file scales. And so you can see it's getting smaller, it's getting bigger, and that's all dependent on my browser window right now. And that's just the way that the demo is set up, but that just shows you like this is rendering natively. There's no loss in quality no matter how big I scale it up or how small it is. And that's like really a huge plus to using Lottie. So now that we have our animation in a JSON file, like what do we actually do with this? So this is where really close collaboration with animator and a developer or designer and developer really comes into play of like having your design mock-up and saying like, hey, this is where we're going to put the JSON, having maybe a concept video of showing it in action, or just working with your developer, screen sharing, getting into the code and making sure that it's the end result is manifesting as you are wanting it. But having this file significantly reduces the level of effort of actually getting your animation into production. So I wanted to share some examples of just Lottie animations being used just on the web. And these are some really great examples. This is one from unit.co where this entire illustration here of showing what the app looks like is all a Lottie animation, all one self-contained Lottie animation. And if you're ever like curious, like, oh, is this Lottie? Is it not? One way is to inspect it, and if you see all these like groups and path fills and all those sorts of things, like good bet that it's a Lottie animation. Or you can actually just view page source and search Lottie, and if you see like Lottie animation and Lottie wrapper and those sorts of things, that's a good indication that they're using Lottie to power this animation. So a really nice thing, lots of things going on in this animation. It's able to really communicate a lot of fun stuff for this specific product. Um, and that's like one way that Lottie can be used, right? Just as like a visual asset that you don't really interact with it. It just kind of like does its own thing, kind of like a video or a GIF. But here's another example from Capital One where they've actually introduced little hover animations, and each one of these are tiny little self-contained Lottie JSON files, and each one of them has like a really fun, clever hover animation. And so this is great because it's like it adds a little bit of fun and excitement and delight to an otherwise just kind of like average everyday thing. And so this is where Lottie JSON files and animations really shine, is because now instead of like a typical GIF or video, I actually have access to the play and stop and the loop and all of those sorts of things through JavaScript, where I can set triggers for interactions that different users are taking. And so this makes those animations really start to come to life. And this is a very like simple implementation of that. You can really expand this to a lot of other areas. So one thing that I run into a lot is really needing to help developers get up to speed if they're not familiar with using Lottie before. And so Airbnb.io/Lottie has all of the docs for different device renderers and web renderers and React Native and so on. And so this gives you a really good idea of, especially in React Native and web, of different functions that you can have. How do you use Lottie? How do you get it up and running? All of those sorts of things. And this really gives you an idea, even as an animator and designer, like what is possible with Lottie, like what kind of interactions can I do? I can play, I can stop, I can pause, I can set the location, I can loop at a specific thing, I can set my speed, all of these things. And so it's good for you as an animator designer to understand, and also as a developer to understand what is possible, so that you're not creating things that are too far out of the scope of what is actually possible with Lottie. All right, everyone. I hope this was super helpful, informative. I hope you know a little bit more about Lottie, what it is, why it matters, and how to use it. There will definitely be more tutorials diving in on how to actually create some of these animations and micro animations and those sorts of things, and how to start thinking about motion in a UX space, and all of those sorts of things. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you guys next time.